Today in Posh Conversations, we're discussing a very interesting topic that's generating, a lot of debate among organizations, HR leaders, and internal committees. And that's about gender-neutral policies. So most organizations today are asking a very simple question. If sexual harassment is experienced by anyone, then shouldn't our workplace mechanisms also be designed to support everyone? To explore this, I'm joined by Rajesh. Hi, Rajesh.
Hello, Anita. This is one of the topics, where workplaces have evolved faster than the legislation.
True.
Right? So, to bridge this gap, a lot of organizations are looking towards building gender-neutral policies, posh policies.
Absolutely. And from, conversations that we have with our clients, many leaders are trying to balance, actually the legal compliance with actually creating, truly inclusive workplaces. So Rajesh, I just want to discuss about, what employers need to get right? So many organizations today, want to move towards a gender neutral policy, but there's one question that comes up repeatedly. So if the posh policy is designed for women, how can they create a gender neutral policy or a gender neutral framework without, creating any kind of legal complication?
That's a very important point that they should consider, and that keeps coming up when they're creating a policy. I think the primary objective before designing the policy should be to make sure that all employees feel that they're equally protected.
Right.
Okay, so whatever you're doing with the policy, especially when you're claiming that it's gender neutral, it should satisfy every employee, and they all should feel equally protected. Now, that's a very big challenge because there is an act and there are certain things that come outside the act. So this is something that is that's the objective that they need to keep in mind while designing this posh policy. One thing very important for employers or organizations to remember is the gender neutral policy cannot replace a posh policy, right? Because a posh policy is required by the act. It can supplement it, so it not replace it. The framework remains exactly the same, okay, but we add other protections for other genders in the policy.
Okay. So what you're saying is effectively a gender neutral policy has two roots?
Yeah, something like that, I would say. But before we even get into that, when we say gender neutral, right, it is a given that women also are, when you say gender neutral, women and all other genders are included in gender neutral. But for the sake of this policy, we need to look at it slightly different. It should read as, gender neutral should read as aggrieved women, okay, that also includes transgender women now, and all other persons apart from this aggrieved woman would constitute a gender neutral definition for this policy. Okay, so that also means that for an aggrieved woman, based on the POSH Act, you need to have one root.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and for all other genders or all other persons apart from an aggrieved woman, will have to follow another route. We'll call it Route 1 and Route 2.
Okay.
So the Route 1 is all clearly defined by the POSH Act. It has all the provisions, it has all the powers of the civil code. There are processes defined, etc.
Right.
So that falls under that category. Route 2 would be something that an organization can define, okay, based on their code of conduct, their service rules, and so many other factors. Right? So they can design that. So these are two routes organizations should very clearly put in the policy. Route 1 would be statutory POSH complaints, and Route 2 would be non-statutory POSH complaints. Okay, so that should be very, very clearly demarcated.
Okay. So Rajesh, to help us understand better, could you elaborate a little bit on the two different, complaint pathways?
Okay, so the Route 1, of course, statutory POSH complaints. It follows the POSH Act. So the aggrieved woman files a complaint with the internal committee.
Right.
So the internal committee does the investigation. There is proper timelines followed.
Mm-hmm.
Plus there's an appeal process and the rest of it, like interim relief and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Right. So that's route number 1. For route number 2, where complaints are from male, transgender male, non-binary people, or any other gender for that matter, usually the process is almost the same, but it is taken under the code of conduct or the service rules of the organization or any other such rules that the organization has. What binds these two? I think that's very important for us to know.
Right.
Route 1, Route 2. What actually makes employees feel equally protected, I think, is if you follow principles of natural justice to the teeth. Okay. So you may have two routes, but if you follow the process, like how you do an inquiry for an aggrieved woman, I think we are being fair. And employees do feel that, yeah, I'm also getting the same kind of a treatment. So that's what binds these two routes together, is what I feel.
Yeah, and so when you just, for our audience, the principles of natural justice means being being fair to both parties and treating them equally, right?
Yes.
With respect to process.
Yes,
And
that's the fundamental thing. But of course, there are other things also that comes under it. But that's the fundamental thing, yeah.
So I think one of the mistakes that many organizations make is that they create a separate process, but don't really provide the same level of protection, right? So what do you have to say about that?
That's exactly the problem, actually. But the policy should explicitly state that all complaints received will be dealt with similarly. For example, confidentiality, protection against retaliation, fair hearing, appeal process, etc., should be very, very clearly defined in the policy. And that's very important. And in other words, what I'm trying to say is dignity should not depend on gender.
Right.
I should make sure that.
So Rajesh, another area that there seems to be a lot of confusion about is, the scope. So could you help us understand who really gets covered under the policy?
Sure. So scope would mean who's covered in the workplace and what it means, the definition of sexual harassment, etc. I think the first thing is that who is covered, right? So we generally policies talk about vendors, our own employees, interns, consultants, customers, etc. I think gender neutral policies should also cover who all are covered in it, like, for example, men, women, transgender persons, non-binary persons. So everything should be very, very clearly stated in the policy. Even workplace, of course, what I would like to say about workplace is it can be specific to that business, right? There are, for example, small finance companies, they have thousands of people working from them. They work all over the place. All that can be very, very clearly defined in the policy, I would say. Very importantly, the digital or online sexual harassment that has evolved from the past 10 years. I would say before we used to get more office-related physical kind of sexual harassment. Now, if you see 95% of them all are coming from digital sexual harassment. So that also has to be clearly defined, like deep fake and AI-generated images, circulation, etc. All those should be covered in the policy.
Yeah. So basically a modern policy should not be restricted to only physical locations.
Absolutely. And everything should be called out. And these are all specific to the organization, what business they are in, and what all they can expect sexual harassment, where all it can come
happen
from.
Yeah. That's so as far as the investigation structure is concerned, in a gender neutral policy, or organizations that have a gender neutral policy, what should employers do about the internal committee?
The best approach, I feel, and we advise organizations also, is for, of course, statutory POSH complaints, the internal committee is going to handle it. There are organizations which have separate, procedures to inquire into a sexual harassment complaints from other genders. But we always suggest to organizations, let the same internal committee take up cases like this because they are trained. They know how to handle sexual harassment cases, which are very sensitive in nature. So we usually, in the policy, we tell them to put, or as a practice, the internal committee handles all cases with all genders. But of course, the policy should very, very clearly say your IC is going to handle all other gender cases. And also, if there's any limitations that the IC cannot handle, that has to be very clearly defined in the policy.
Yeah. And I think that's, I think that allows the other employees to feel also that it's the same body that's investigating, and a sense of fairness that comes in as a result of that.
Another important aspect I suddenly remembered is that while defining sexual harassment, right, so the regular policies have, what the various definitions of sexual harassment. In a gender neutral policy, it's very important to address also things like homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, and these and any other things that are that can be constituted as sexual harassment in other genders have to be put in the policy.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rajesh, it appears that employees are more afraid of retaliation than actually the original incident. Should there be a specific, anti-retaliation sort of a framework that's mentioned in the policies?
Absolutely, right? So it should be called out as a separate violation, okay, and it should cover all sorts of retaliation and how the organization is going to protect people from retaliation. That has to be called out very strictly, and as a separate violation, it should be called out in the policy.
So, Rajesh, what about the appeal process? So, we know very clearly that for an aggrieved woman under the Posh Act, the appeal process is, very clear, right? Should there be an appeal process for gender-neutral complaints?
Yes, definitely. I mean, if you want to be fair to all genders, you need to have an appeal process. An appeal process can be designed within the organization for all other genders. Posh Act anyway has an appeal process very clearly defined. And once the organization decides who the appellate authority is within the organization, it has to be very clearly defined in the Posh policy also. So to be fair, you need to have appeal processes for all genders, basically.
Right. So I think there's one message that I'd like employers to take away. It's that, a gender-neutral policy is not just a drafting exercise, right?
Yes, it's a statement made by the organization that workplace dignity belongs to everyone in the organization. It is usually driven from the top, right? The leadership involvement is very important while drafting a policy like this. Awareness sessions, very important.
Yeah.
Managers' responsibilities, and very importantly, IC should be trained on how to handle gender-neutral complaints. Very, very important.
Yeah.
Right. I think these are some things that are driven top down. So the top management has to get involved in this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think leadership commitment is very crucial in this stage. So perhaps the simplest way to think about a gender-neutral, Posh policy is one law, two complaint routes, equal dignity and equal protection, right?
Exactly. So I think that summarizes it very well. So it's women continue to get protection under the Act. Other genders have equivalent redressal mechanisms within the organization. Different legal routes maybe, but equal protection to all employees.
Absolutely.
One thought for employers and organizations is this, that don't look at building a gender-neutral policy as a compliance project, right? So you have to look at it like a trust-building project where employees feel equally protected. I think that should be your aim while designing this gender-neutral policy.
Thank you, Rajesh. Well said. And thank you for a wonderful conversation. And thanks to all our listeners for joining us on Metis Posh Radio. So until next time, remember that inclusion is not just about expanding policies, right? It's about expanding protection, respect, dignity to every person, who walks through our workplace doors.